with, one sec, okay, let me just start over this. Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Hsia. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the work that I've been doing professionally with Reed Hildebrand, which is a landscape architecture firm based in Cambridge. And I've been working as a landscape architect for almost a decade now, maybe a decade. And before that, I was in the environmental science field and actually volunteered with CRWA for about a year on in the Blue Cities program with Pallavi and Julie Wood. So let me share my screen here. And I do live in Brookline, which is a watershed community, and the city of Cambridge, about 2/3 of it is in the Charles River watershed and about 1/3 is in the Mystic. Okay, can you all see my screen? Yep, great. So I've had the privilege of working with the city of Cambridge on their urban forest master plan. It was about a 2-year process undertaking, and it started in 2018. And following that, we worked with them on a soils management plan and an outreach engagement plan for the year following that. So it was about a 3-year project. It's been 2 years really since we've really worked with them. And so, you know, just bear with me on some of the details if they get fuzzy. The master plan was truly an interdisciplinary project. The team really spanned the disciplines of ecology, policy, arboriculture, soils, climate resiliency. And we set forth many strategies from policy initiatives to management practices, urban design proposals, with the goal of growing and maintaining the urban forest. The process included an intensive engagement process with a task force that was formed from Cambridge residents and stakeholders. We met monthly for 13 months. There were also 3 public meetings, a parking day event, and a few presentations to the committee at City Council, Health and Environment Committee at City Council. As you know, trees do so much for our city and for the people who live in them, provide vital ecological services, mental and health benefits, and they are vital for forming the identity of the places in the city, providing a spot to rest, beauty along our city streets, and much needed shade in our commercial corridors. Nationally, many cities are facing persistent canopy decline. Between 2009 and 2018, the city of Cambridge's canopy declined an average of 16 acres per year. And with warmer temperatures, climate change brings new challenges to maintaining a healthy forest. One of the large kind of analysis that we undertook was modeling future scenarios of how the canopy would change over a 50-year time horizon, and estimated the risks to the urban forest from climate change, such as increased temperature, likely pests and diseases, and then also events such as flooding and drought. And so using LiDAR survey paired with multispectral aerial photography, we were able to identify the trees in Cambridge by species. And this was a really powerful tool for us. It allowed us to model mortality risk by species into the future. And it also revealed the vulnerability of the urban forest. For example, if a pest impacts the top 3 most popular species, in this case, Norway maple, pin oak, honey locust, that only really leaves 17% canopy cover for the city. And so it creates a really strong argument for diversification. We also determined that the health of the city's trees through area data revealed which species fared better in tougher urban environments. And so here is the canopy cover in 2018. The city also had data from 2009 from a LiDAR survey. So we were able to look at the change in canopy cover for those 9 years. And so 2018 at 26%, 2009 at 30%, that's a drop of 4%. And then modeling it into the future, looking at kind of tree species mortality risk. 2030, we would expect something like 17.5%. This is looking at the baseline mortality rate and just projecting it forward. And then 2050 would be 9.8%. This is a kind of business as usual scenario. And so we're looking at this kind of trajectory. We also looked at a few different climate scenarios, and I'm just going to I just pulled out the flooding one since we're in the CRWA. This is illustrating, the watersheds. 2/3 of Cambridge is in the Charles River watershed, and 1/3 of that is in the Mystic. And I believe, and I'm fuzzy on this, but I believe the scenario we looked at for flooding was a 100-year storm event in 2030. And what we found was that, basically what the methodology here was looking at flood intolerant species that are in the those flooded areas, and kind of removed or assumed mortality for species that were in poor and fair condition. And that would result in about 0.7 acres of loss. I know it says here minimal reduction in canopy. It's still quite a bit of canopy loss. But what we recommend here, what we recommend in flood prone areas is really to plant flood tolerant species. And then for drought areas that are really susceptible to drought, for example, near impervious surfaces, we're really looking to plant drought tolerant species. So it's not just about how much canopy there is, but where it is. Canopy is not equitably distributed across the city, with below canopy in the eastern part of Cambridge and above canopy in the western part of Cambridge. And unsurprisingly, canopy cover correlates strongly to previously redlined areas, and redlined areas were areas that were marked for disinvestment. So West Cambridge here, you can see were rated like first grade and second grade, whereas East Cambridge was rated hazardous.
Wow.
And so areas that were redlined have about half of the canopy cover than those that weren't. We also found that areas with higher percentages of populations at risk, basically people who are older, are minorities, have less income, less of a social net, live in areas with lower canopy cover. And that means urban heat island impact will have a disproportionate effect on those who are less able to respond to heat stresses. And so the legacy of redlining really now translates to heat island risk. The mapping also revealed that between 2009 and 2018, most of the canopy loss was happening on private residential property. And so in order to combat the trajectory of canopy loss in the city, it is really essential to engage private property owners. I've talked about some of the risks and challenges. What are we aiming for? We are aiming for an equitable, resilient urban forest where all constituents are invested and participate in its care. An equitable forest provides benefits for all its people, which is why we set a minimum target of 25% canopy cover by neighborhood. And so rather than focusing on an overall canopy cover goal for the city, it's really about getting canopy where it's needed the most. A resilient urban forest benefits human health and well-being. Trees can form cool corridors across the city, reduce heat island where people need it the most, where they're shopping, strolling, commuting. So we target 60% canopy cover over sidewalks and a 50% reduction in heat island hotspots. A resilient urban forest is also able to quickly recover from disturbances, pests and diseases outbreak, and so it should be diverse and not have an overabundance of a single species or genus or family. And an equitable resilient forest really relies on the collective action of many in the city. There isn't a single cause in the canopy decline, and so we must be all doing our part. And we know that the urban forest is a living system. It's dynamic and responsive to changing environmental conditions. It is a product of cycles of planting, decline, renewal. And so while we target 30% canopy cover for the city, we do understand that that will fluctuate over time. How do we get there? Really simply put, our strategies are grouped into the two buckets of curbing loss and planting trees. And curbing loss meaning really protecting and maintaining existing trees. It takes decades to grow canopy. As we talked earlier today, Stephen was mentioning it took about 20 years to grow his birch to a good size. And so for this reason, the most powerful impact on future canopy cover is to protect trees. This is a series of charts that illustrate the relationship between curbing loss and planting trees. This is tailored to the city of Cambridge and their current loss rate. Really it illustrates that the more you're able to protect trees, the fewer trees that you need to plant in order to reach your target goal. Mm-hmm. The master plan document illustrates a range of strategies that fall into the categories of policy, design, practices, outreach, and others. Policy really relating to what city government can do to reduce removals or encourage plantings. Designs referring to innovative approaches to enhancing planting. Practices relate to really what the city is doing on the day-to-day care, such as soil maintenance, watering, and pruning, and then outreach, communications, and engagement. And the city cannot, we have a whole bunch of, I think something like 53 in the document, and they cannot implement all of these strategies at once. So we developed an action plan, which prioritizes several of the strategies to guide decision-making for the next 5 years. And it has been about 3 years since the Urban Forest Master Plan has been completed, and the city has done a really amazing job. They've almost done all of these things on this list. How do we reduce loss? As mentioned earlier, the majority of loss is happening on private residential property. We undertook a mapping exercise and some field investigations and found that much of the canopy loss is relating to these 4 categories of new construction, renovation, general mortality, declining health, and miscellaneous decisions by individual owners. One of the ways the city can protect trees is through their tree protection ordinance. In response to this research, the city has reworked their tree protection ordinance to apply to significant trees on private property, or to all significant trees on private residential property. And it reduces the threshold for what counts as significant tree from 8 inches to 6 inches DBH, which is diameter breast height. And it is really important for the city to speak about tree protection, not in a punitive way, but in a way that emphasizes a collective benefit. And so we worked on this with our sub-consultants over under on this postcard that was sent to the residents of the city about the tree protection ordinance. We also developed a soils management plan for the city trees and have done a lot of soil testing to determine which soil attributes are most impactful to tree health. Trees in particular live in incredibly stressful environments. We looked at the possible factors from permeable rooting area, compaction, soil condition, etc., and really found that salts from winter use and estimated root space, which is the amount of soil a tree has access to, have the greatest correlations to tree health. And so we created a kind of management guide focused on what we felt like were the most important attributes to manage, and with kind of a guide for how to help both existing and new trees. How do we encourage planting? So you may have heard about green factor, which I think highlighted in Seattle and Portland, and has been adopted. The kind of idea has been adopted in many places. It is a score-based code requirement that requires developers to meet a kind of minimum score, and it's meant to improve the quality of landscaping. The city of Cambridge, we worked with them to develop something called the cool factor, which is really kind of based on the same idea, but would require a development project to meet certain cooling requirements in order to obtain a permit. And so we helped them to develop this menu of options with, the idea is to provide flexibility for how to reach the cooling requirement. And it was passed, the ordinance was passed a few months ago. It is not called cool factor. Unfortunately, it is called green factor, but it is based on evidence-based strategies that will cool, and it does have an emphasis on public realm cooling. So you get double the points if your trees are placed near the public realm. And this kind of tax-like chart on the left is the score sheet. We're also thinking about how to move community members to plant and nurture trees and to advocate and invest in the urban forest. For the outreach and engagement plan, we started with a discovery process and we interviewed, this was happening during COVID, so we were a bit constrained just, kind of through Zoom meetings, and we interviewed residents, corporate owner representatives, environmental nonprofits, and youth activists to learn about their views on trees and what messages resonate with them, so we could develop material that would move people in action to action. We worked with a messaging firm called Libretto based in Boston, and we tailored specific narratives. As we understand that each audience needs to be engaged differently. So for example, environmentalists could be early adopters and allies, and corporate audiences have an opportunity to engage staff. And underserved and under-resourced communities have less bandwidth, but they can be advocates. And so we, and this is the kind of messaging guidelines, and over under another consultant we worked with developed brand guidelines. So this is a framework for how we thought about moving individuals into action through the steps of building understanding, and then motivating and providing tools and know-how. And then scaling up to the city, we developed kind of 3 themes for a kind of suite of engagement strategies. The first is about showing city commitment on the left here. And it's the idea of that being by demonstrating investment in the initiative and by leading by example, the city can inspire others to take action to protect and expand the urban forest. The second is to empower people, and this is about building programs and building capacity, providing financial and social support that would allow the people in Cambridge to take effective action. And a lot of this is targeted at reducing barriers to hard to reach populations by going to where they are and building relationships with existing groups. And then lastly, making it easy. This is about reducing barriers by providing the knowledge about what needs to be done and the tools required to it. And then this chart is really kind of starts from the middle and immediate actions to long-term and kind of wish lists. So this was our kind of way of structuring a plan moving forward for engagement. I just want to share some of the projects we have implemented since with the city. This was a kind of revamp of their volunteer program, which we rebranded to Forest Friends, created a volunteer tree guide based on the season, kind of what you could be doing by season. We also created these tree tags. So every new city that the city plants has this tag that's advertising for the volunteer program and really kind of soliciting help for that tree in terms of watering. And then during their Arbor Day event in 2021, we developed this kind of scavenger hunt where we picked really interesting trees throughout the city, and the city also has, planted, in park spaces and et cetera. So we made this kind of scavenger hunt that you would use your phone with a kind of QR code and had these signs out. This was during COVID, and we wanted something that felt COVID safe as well. And then lastly, we produced a series of videos. There's also this kind of tree sticker that, before the tree is planted, it's kind of like an advertisement for, something's coming soon. And then leaf bags, which I'm not sure if they've implemented or not, but we love this idea of the city having their own branded leaf bags that could also be serving to kind of like advertise for the city of Cambridge Urban Forest. Where should we plant? So the canopy cover by neighborhood does range quite widely, between 13% in East Cambridge to 36% in West Cambridge. And the images you see here really show the reality of what a limited canopy cover feels like. And it really also illustrates the challenges of planting in areas where the urban form is not conducive to planting. You'll notice no or limited setbacks in the picture on the top. Whereas in West Cambridge below, there are generous setbacks and there's space in the verge for tree planting. We found that tree condition fares poorly with reduced setbacks. Sorry, this is not good. Let's see this one here. In some areas of the city, the public realm is really the only place for additional canopy. And so street redesign should be opportunistic. And strategies that create additional space for street trees should be integrated into the process of street reconstruction. And so we can provide better support for trees by expanding soil volumes here and densifying planting. We can repurpose streets by removing parking, or even here an entire lane of roadway. But we do understand there are many competing interests for space on the city street. And so dedicating, adequate space for trees is a kind of negotiation process with different user groups. We also focused on areas of need, which was a kind of combination of common pedestrian and bicycle routes that are here in the dark blue with priority areas. Our definition of a priority area was this kind of combination of environmentally vulnerable populations, heat island hotspots, and community infrastructures such as public schools and hospitals. And so these were really areas we have highlighted as being priority areas to target tree planting efforts. How should we plant? We should really be open to different ways of planting. We call trees in the city an urban forest, but really in reality, the trees are spaced widely apart with little or no understory, and it represents an ecosystem more like a savanna. But potentially there are opportunities within the city where it could be more forest-like or a hybrid version, where planting is closer together with an understory, and shared soil volumes, which is something as a landscape architect we're trying to always do, is very beneficial for trees. The tree-to-tree interaction is great for tree health. And implementing best practices such as increasing monitoring, remediation of soils, structural pruning for young trees. These are some of the recommendations that the city has undertaken that we've recommended. And one of the really exciting ones they've done is establish a bare root nursery. And bare root, just to describe really quickly, is when you plant trees, they come in a big root ball with soil. Bare root is basically a root ball without soil, and it's kind of placed in hibernation. There are restrictions to when and how you can plant it, but what this allows the city to do with their bare root nursery is they can plant a lot more trees, smaller, and they have a higher survivability. And the city has upped their planting from about 200 to 400 per year to, I think this year they're planning on something like 1,200 trees. And a lot of that is enabled through the bare root nursery that they've established at Fresh Pond. What should we plant? To add resiliency to the urban forest, we've kind of recommended these guidelines that are pretty well established of diversifying, species no more than 10% of the percentage of the urban forest and 20% genus. We did evaluate species, as I mentioned earlier in the climate modeling, based on their susceptibility to pests and diseases, drought tolerance and flood tolerance, and relative urban street tolerance. So this was our kind of database of how we understood how species would fare with a changing climate. This is a chart looking at the top 10 species, common species in the city of Cambridge, and how they would fare with a changing climate. So Hsia pollinoides is the Norway maple. This is the honey locust. And so we may expect to see more honey locusts in the future. And this is for genus. And then looking across the city, this is kind of, I guess what I had mentioned before, but 29% of the forest is high accessibility to pest and drought and flood factors. About half of it is at medium risk and about 19 low risk. And we have recommended new additions to the city's underwire and canopy tree lists, really looking at what is not currently represented and what would do well in a changing climate. And what could the city be like if we succeed? So I'm going to end with a couple more aspirational scenarios. This was looking at East Cambridge, a portion of it, and looking at what we could do to get more planting into this particular area, using some of the strategies that we were looking at. So, for example, looking at increasing right-of-way planting, so 30 tree spacing, adding trees where they were not placed or where there was room for trees. Lane diets, there was a winter where there was so much snow that some of the streets went to one-ways. And so we assumed, well, if it worked, maybe we could do a lane diet, remove basically a lane and add trees there. Backyard planting, so upping the canopy cover in residential backyards. Parking lots are a big, land cover in East Cambridge, thinking, okay, we could get more tree planting in parking lots. And then what the city has a lot of control over and a lot of space for tree planting are the existing parks. So increasing buffer planting for parks. And this is looking at, so once we planted those out to maturity, that increases canopy cover in this particular area from 15% to 25% canopy cover. And what does that mean for heat island? This is a heat island model based on the existing canopy of 15%. And this is what it would be for the 25% scenario. And this is the kind of net cooling that you would see. This is ambient air temperature, so not surface temperature, which, you could see in some cases that you would experience a 4-degree ambient air cooling, which is quite significant. We also looked at what if the city maximized planting in the right-of-way on city streets. And so we planted out 12,000 trees to create cool corridors. And below here, we're looking at, something like on average, the city would cool by about 0.5 degree and some areas over 4 degrees. And then lastly, looked at if we were to really maximize tree planting, 21,000 trees, looking at the kind of priorities of equity, resilience, and shared responsibility. And it's a little bit hard to tell, but that's the kind of map of the canopy there. Thank you. I'd love to hear any questions you have.
No. Stephanie, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I know I have a bunch of questions, but I won't be piggy and go first. I will start off with anyone, and I see Will has a question. Go ahead, Will.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's been, wow, it's a lot of information, quite stimulating, great stuff. Hopefully, we can borrow this information and apply it down the road. I guess my understanding or the impression I've gathered is that from your presentation, individual residents in Cambridge contribute to the planting and maintenance of trees. Is that correct?
Well, they, so I think in terms of canopy, what I'm referring to is the trees that they have on their property. That is their trees, really. And so there is a program that the city has called the Backup Sidewalk Program, where if you are a private residence and you want a tree that is about 25 feet away from the sidewalk, the city will plant that tree for you, but you have to take care of it. They're not going to come and prune it and water it, et cetera. But otherwise, everything as a private property owner, everything on your property is your responsibility. The tree protection ordinance, it was pretty controversial because, the ordinance only applied to developer projects of a certain size. And through kind of this process during the master plan, they put a moratorium on all tree cutting permits for residential property until, the results kind of came out from this plan. And that kind of, I think it was maybe not marketed or spoken about in the right way because people did get upset. But now there is a tree protection ordinance that applies to all trees, like on private residential property. And what that means is you apply for a permit to take down your tree if it is 6 inches DBH or above, and you must mitigate for that either through new tree planting, you could plant a new tree, or you can pay a fee, which would allow for tree planting to occur elsewhere.
No, thank you. I think your tree protection ordinance was a transplant from Somerville Tree Protection Ordinance. We either borrow the one from Cambridge or Cambridge borrow from us. But thank you, Stephanie. I guess just one last one, because this is like Emily said, I had like a bunch of questions, but I know we politicians, we don't want to take the whole space. I guess out of those trees you said like 1,200 trees annually, like what was the number like, and what was the survival rate for those trees? Because we don't know yet. It's been I'm not sure how much tracking they're doing. It would be really, really interesting to know that. Young trees have generally a higher mortality rate than older trees. It is just a tough time to establish, especially on city streets. But they are, implementing practices. It is important to do the right things for that tree, provide irrigation. They have a water by bike program, and they've upped the number of people who are watering and increased the kind of length of time they're doing that, 5 years versus 3 years. They're also, in terms of soils management, really have done a lot for that. They're adding kind of nutrients into the soils. And then the bare root trees, they do from a kind of, we don't have data from the city of Cambridge, but generally that is, that produces higher rates of success for trees because the trees are undergoing less stress during transplant with the bare root tree. Gotcha. Thank you. Since this session is being recorded, I will not say anything bad about some of it. Thank you.
Not that you would have anyway. Thank you. Let's move on to Ginger.
Am I muted? No, I'm not. Good. We'll have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm curious about two things. Given all this effort that's been developed, is there someone or a department in the city of Cambridge's hierarchy dedicated to trees in Cambridge? I mean, you need to have somebody who follows up on all this effort.
Yeah, that's a great question. This plan was undertaken by the City of Public Works Department. Mm-hmm. It was not a planning. They have also a community development department that does more of the planning work, but this was a Department of Public Works. So we did work with both departments. They had created a position during the master plan called the Superintendent of Urban Forestry. And so his role is dedicated to implementing the urban forest master plan.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of the planting on the ground work, but he does a lot of communication as well. And there's a city arborist. They did hire an assistant arborist to kind of increase the amount of plantings that could be done in the city. And then they do, I believe, have hired recently a communications engagement person. I'm not sure how dedicated that is to the urban forest master plan specifically versus other kind of Department of Public Works projects, probably an overall role. But I think you kind of like pointed to a good point that tree interests are held across many different departments in the city. And it is a huge challenge because it requires so much, to really have a very effective plan. Ideally, you could have the health department, the planning department, public works, all working together in the interest. We had recommended as one of the strategies to have somebody's role be the kind of tree person who is working with all these different departments and speaking for the interests of the trees. That hasn't happened, but it could, because then it just relies on individual actors to reach out to the right people in other departments. So I think it's just a general challenge. I think probably all cities and towns kind of deal with.
Because my other question was, we mentioned earlier interdisciplinary, but you're right. The way government is structured is more siloed than we'd like, perhaps. So is there any effort to educate kids in the school about the importance of trees?
Yeah, they definitely do that. That was one of our engagement kind of recommendations. I don't think right now that the Department of Public Works has a program. The hope is that, there's maybe more outreach to schools. We learned that, youth is it's just a really effective way to reach grownups as well. If your kid is coming home and is talking about trees, and talking about oh, what if we planted a tree? It's just a great way to kind of get everyone on board. Yeah, and plus, it's, they're the future generation. And
you also needed to pay attention when your tree is looking thirsty or has had some damage. It's at least on Beacon Hill where I live, the threats to trees succeeding are numerous. And if people were paying attention, a lot of the ones that don't make it probably would.
Yeah. Sometimes it just takes, some extra filling those gator bags, which are the green bags next to the trees. A lot of times city can't get around to watering, and watering, I would say, is one of the biggest challenges, especially during the summer and there's, when there's drought. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ginger. Great questions. Dira.
Yes, thanks, Stephanie. This was a really interesting presentation, especially as Boston is working on their tree ordinance right now. They're only working on their public part of their tree ordinance, and they're going to do their private tree ordinance at some point in the future. I had a couple questions. Are the suggestions for the diversity for the plant species reflective of diversity in terms of flood tolerant versus heat tolerant? Because I feel like a lot of the times when we review development projects, we always suggest heat tolerant plans for urban heat island. There's not a lot of conversation around flood tolerant plans because a lot of the assumption is that there is subsurface stormwater management or other, form of stormwater management. But is your percentage, suggestion reflective of that?
It's not. I think it's a really interesting question. It's kind of the ratio of 10% per species that's based on a kind of arborist recommendation. I think the question about flood tolerance really is more of where that happens, in the city and where it's more susceptible to flooding. And so the recommendation is really about in those areas, in the flood prone areas, to plant flood tolerant species. but it doesn't mean they can't go together, where you still want to diversify your tree species within those areas.
Great, thank you. And then just one last question about the cool factor for the development project. Does that apply to every single project, or is there like a minimum requirement of projects that they would only consider the cool factor?
Yeah, it was applied to larger projects. I don't remember what the threshold is. And there was a lot of conversation about, because so much of Cambridge's renovation work, how that might come into play. I don't think it applies right now to renovation. So I think it's new construction of a certain size.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Dira. So Stephanie, I wanted to ask, I didn't hear you talk about gas leaks. And is that something that was brought into the analysis? Certainly in my community in Newton, it's been an issue. If you don't check ahead, then you're going to spend a lot of money and time and effort on replanting that are not going to be successful until the gas leaks are fixed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We did not focus on gas leaks, and I do actually feel like that's a gap in what we studied. It had been brought up, and I think maybe part of it was the city kind of has limited ability to correct. It's a kind of private utility infrastructure, and so in terms of where when you plant as a developer or with the city, I think that would be a great kind of guideline to add. But yeah, we did not look into gas leaks, which is.
And did you do much analysis of the environmental benefits of mature trees, like 30-plus-year-old trees versus planting new? Because that's something I've certainly learned in my work, not only just at CRWA, but also in Newton, is the tremendous additional environmental benefits once trees have been around for a while. So you can replace the caliper inches, but you're not necessarily replacing the environmental benefit when you take down a mature tree.
Definitely. We did use iTree as a tool for looking at benefit of the urban forest. And there is a disproportionate benefit to larger trees, like you mentioned. And a lot of it's kind of a volume, right? It's not just a square footage of canopy, it's a volume of canopy. And that means more leaf area. And that leaf area is what is doing the work of like carbon sequestration, of evapotranspiration, of cooling, So, and then there's also a disproportionate impact when it comes to the amount of percentage of canopy cover in an area. So if you're looking at 10%, 20%, 40%, once you get up to the 40%, there's research into this, that the cooling impact of the 40% is much greater proportionally than the 10% or 20%. So that's why we in parks, we had wanted, set the target to more like 40%, where you can get more impact for your canopy.
Fabulous. See, Ginger, you have another question.
There's a lot of, I think, controversy might be the word, about Norway maples. Mm-hmm. I mean, some places they're being banned. So is it because the situation in urban settings is very different from when they get into a forest, or what, do you have an opinion about Norway maples?
Yeah, it is considered an invasive. A lot of maples they're just really good at self-seeding. Mm-hmm. And they were planted a lot in the past. We did not recommend removing them. They are still serving a great benefit. There are a lot of large Norway maples, but they will naturally decline and they will die. And we're not recommending planting more. And so eventually they may still persist in some way, but it's not intentionally being planted. The question of native versus non-native, in an urban environment, you are very limited in terms of what will work. And if we want to be diverse and we want to be resilient, we have to be open to non-native. As long as they're not invasive, You know, they are providing a benefit, and that's really what we are aiming for. You know, private residential where we have more space, that's kind of a different story, but we have to kind of be open-minded when it comes to native versus non-native.
My dog is barking.
Fabulous.
Stephanie.
Go ahead, Steve.
Stephanie, it was about 10 years ago that the city of Cambridge was looking at using porous pavement in some of the streets on Huron and Concord Ave areas to basically take care of that first dirty inch of runoff. And I don't know if it was ever installed. And I'm wondering if that increased amount of infiltration, at least in the street area, if they did install it, would have any positive impact on trees. And because the root balls are rather large and they extend out into streets. And so I don't know if did that ever happen? Did they ever?
Nick is saying it was installed in some locations. I would say that permeable pavement, unless it's really close to where the trees are, like on the sidewalk, that it probably has a limited ability to get to the tree and to benefit the tree. Perhaps more mature trees have established root systems that would go under the roadway, but typically for young trees, that would not be the case. So we do design systems on the sidewalks and urban plazas with permeable pavement around trees, you know, just to get that additional irrigation for the trees. But roadways, we wouldn't kind of expect the kind of benefit to trees.
But at least if it's done on both the sidewalk and the roadway, then the benefit is more uniform in that respect.
Yeah.
Both sides of the verge, I don't know what I'm saying. The sidewalk and the street.
Yeah.
So we are at 1 o'clock. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
Sorry, I just wanted to weigh in
Nick,
on in this area of Concord Ave and Huron. I have seen some installed, but I would be curious to know the effectiveness of those sections of permeable pavement, because it's really just the edge, you know, maybe 4 feet or so of the roadway close to the curb. So I don't know how much it reduces the runoff there or what that looks like.
Yeah, it's permeable pavement is really hard. It's all depends on maintenance and how much, you know, a lot of salting and sanding that happens, and it's all dependent on getting the guck out of the porous space of the permeable pavement. Yeah, we tend to see it really being helpful for a couple of years, but if they don't properly maintain it, then it just gets clogged and yeah.
I think maintenance is a word that's creeping back into a lot of management, just the maintenance of different things. And I think in trees, maintenance is very important. Pruning, regular pruning, keeping the trees open. They respond very vibrantly to pruning, and it's just something that nobody wants to spend money on, you know, and it really takes work like this to highlight the benefits of doing that and of the resources themselves.
Yeah, not a lot of ribbon cuttings for maintenance.
Yeah.
Not sexy. So it's a little after 1, and I want to be respectful of folks' time. Just so you know, I mean, as our work helping cities and towns with their various climate resilience strategies, this is really helpful. Especially it helps cities and towns to look at what Cambridge spent $1 million on and just take the ideas, because none of the other communities have anywhere near the resources Cambridge does. So when Cambridge goes first, it really does trickle down, so to speak, to the other communities. CRWA also got a congressional earmark to work on a regional tree planting and canopy protection plan. So this will help inform that work as well. So really, really appreciate you taking the time, Stephanie, to do this presentation, and to all of you for coming and attending. And I did tape it, so we will share it with others. With that, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Happy to answer
Stephanie.
any questions too. So just feel free to email.
Perfect.
Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.